There was a yeoman with them at his side, no other servant, so he chose to ride. This yeoman wore a coat and hood of green, and peacock-feathered arrows, bright and keen and neatly sheathed, hung at his belt the while, for he could dress his gear in yeoman style. His arrows never drooped their feathers low, and in his hand he bore a mighty bow. His head was like a nut, his face was brown. He knew the whole of woodcraft up and down. A saucy brace was on his arm to ward it from the bowstring, and a shield and sword hung at one side, and at the other slipped a jaunty dirk, spear-sharp and well-equipped. A medal of St. Christopher he wore, of shining silver on his breast, and bore a hunting horn, well slung and burnished clean, that dangled from a baldric of bright green. He was a proper forester, I guess. There also was a nun, a prioress. Her way of smiling very simple and coy. Her greatest oath was only, "By Saint Loy!" And she was known as Madame Eglantine. And well she sang a service with a fine intoning through her nose, as was most seemly. And she spoke daintily in French, extremely after the school of Stratford at a bow. French in the Paris style she did not know. At meat her manners were well taught withal. No morsel from her lips did she let fall, nor dipped her fingers in the sauce too deep, but she could carry a morsel up and keep the smallest drop from falling on her breast. For courtliness she had a special zest, and she would wipe her upper lip so clean that not a trace of grease was to be seen upon the cup when she had drunk. To eat, she reached a hand sedately for the meat. She certainly was very entertaining, pleasant and friendly in her ways, and straining to counterfeit a courtly kind of grace, a stately bearing fitting to her place, and to seem dignified in all her dealings. As for her sympathies and tender feelings, she was so charitably solicitous. She used to weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap, if it were dead or bleeding, and she had little dogs she would be feeding, with roasted flesh or milk or fine white bread, and bitterly she wept if one were dead, or someone took a stick and made it smart. She was all sentiment and tender heart. Her veil was gathered in a seemly way, her nose was elegant, her eyes glass-gray, her mouth was very small, but soft and red, her forehead certainly was fair of spread, almost a span across the brows. I own she was indeed no means undergrown. Her cloak, I noticed, had a graceful charm. She wore a coral trinket on her arm, a set of beads, the gaudies tricked in green, whence hung a golden brooch of brightest sheen, on which there first was graven a crowned A, and lower, Amor vincit omnia. Another nun, the chaplain at her cell, was riding with her, and 3 priests as well. A monk there was, one of the finest sort who rode the country. Hunting was his sport, a manly man to be an abbot able. Many a dainty horse he had in stable. His bridle when he rode a man might hear, jingling and whistling wind as clear, aye, and as loud as does the chapel bell, where my lord monk was prior of the cell. The rule of good St. Bennet or St. Maur, as old and strict, he tended to ignore. He let go by the things of yesterday and took the modern world's more spacious way. He did not rate that text at a plucked hen which says that hunters are not holy men, and that a monk uncloistered is a mere fish out of water flapping on the pier. That is to say, a monk out of his cloister. That was a text he held not worth an oyster, and I agreed and said his views were sound. Was he to study till his head went round, poring over books in cloisters? Must he toil, as Austin bade, until the very soil? Was he to leave the world upon the shelf? Let Austin have his labor to himself. This monk was therefore a good man to horse. Greyhounds he had, as swift as birds to course. Hunting a hare or riding at a fence was all his fun, he spared for no expense. I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine grey fur, the finest in the land. and on his hood, to fasten it at his chin, he had a wrought gold, cunningly fashioned pin. Into a lover's knot it seemed to pass. His head was bald and shone like looking-glass. So did his face, as if it had been greased. He was a fat and personable priest. His prominent eyeballs never seemed to settle. They glittered like the flames beneath a kettle. Supple, his boots, his horse in fine condition, he was a prelate fit for exhibition. He was not pale like a tormented soul. He liked a fat swan best, and roasted whole. His palfrey was brown as is a berry,